Hello, my name is Tony. This may not be so easy. You see, The Executioner, a British-made Cold War neo-noir spy thriller from 1970, is one of my favourite films. No one else I've met, or haven't met, come to that, film critics for instance, seem to rate it or like it much, which puts me in something of a minority. Now, I don't mind being in a minority, I'm comfortable with that. I don't mind if I'm the only person in the world who likes it. But when it comes to reviewing it, that means I'm going to have to, at least to some meagre extent, justify and explain why I like it. Usually I'm clear in my own mind about such things, as clear as I ever am about anything, but in certain respects, even I'm not completely sure what it is about it that I like so much. Sometimes I question if I do in fact like it, or if I only think I do, but that would be ridiculous, yeah? Well, let us see. Or not, depending on how things go. Sam Wanamaker was an American big screen, small screen and theatre director and character actor, much utilised and much respected. Fearing getting blacklisted in the 50s McCarthy witch hunts in his native land, he relocated to England, where he made a life and career for himself. He directed only 4 big screen movies, of which The Executioner is one. The other 3 being The File of the Golden Goose with Yul Brynner in 69, Catlow, a western again with Brynner in 71, and the Ray Harryhausen fantasy Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger in 77. For my money, The Executioner is his best directorial screen work. The cast is headed up by American George Peppard, roped in to try and give it appeal stateside, I'd guess. The main supporting troupe is British: Keith Michelle, Joan Collins, Judy Geeson, Charles Gray, Nigel Patrick, and George Baker. Oscar Homolka crops up as a Russian for the sake of variety, if nothing else. The script is an original by British TV writer Jack Pullman. Ron Goodwin provides the score, and Dennis Coop the cinematography. Coop had lent some of the groundbreaking black and white British kitchen sink film dramas of the early 60s, and would go on to provide the visuals for Superman in 1978. Ron Goodwin was a premier music soundtrack composer with a stellar track record. In the film, George Peppard is John Shea, an Englishman raised and educated in America, now working as an MI5 asset. Events kick off at a scene of carnage in and around a coastal property in Corfu. There are bullet-riddled bodies strewn about and a car that slowly burns then explodes. Shea carries a woman with a bullet wound to her arm indoors and tends to her. She is Sarah, Joan Collins. Disjointed flashbacks inform of their romantic past. Then the narrative that will lead to this point kicks in. Shea is in Vienna when his spy network is blown apart. As KGB agents close in on him and the last surviving member of his team, they only just manage to escape with their lives. Back in London, Shea and his girlfriend, MI5 filing clerk Polly Judy Geeson, attend a garden party and cricket match, hosted by Sarah and a Ponzi upper-class aristo husband, Adam Booth, Keith Michelle. Sarah dumped Shea to marry Adam for financial security and enhanced social status. Adam is an MI5 operative and card-carrying member of the Old Boys Network or club who run the show. The superiors of both men are Vaughan Jones, Charles Gray, and Colonel Scott, Nigel Patrick. Shea is consumed by the idea there is a leak in MI5, a traitor responsible for the destruction of his spy cell. Jones and Scott dismiss the idea and relegate Shea to odd job duties. He's not to be dissuaded so easily and coerces Polly into providing him with the files on all recent failed MI5 operations. The common denominator in all cases is the involvement of Adam Booth. Shea becomes convinced that Booth is a double agent working for Moscow Central. One of Shea's odd jobs is to run a security check on a government chemical facility headed by scientist Crawford, George Baker. The facility has developed a new experimental rocket fuel for NASA. Crawford is having an affair with Sarah. She don't half put it about where the men are concerned. Shea and Polly are suspended over the misappropriation of the operational files, but Shea directly accuses Booth of treason to Jones and Scott, threatening to take things higher up the chain of command if an investigation is not undertaken. His suspicions are further inflamed when he interviews Soviet defector Rakovsky, Oscar Homolka, at a CIA safe house in Istanbul. Rakovsky provides some additional clues just before getting blown up in a car taking him to the airport. The inquiry takes place, but the members of the board close ranks and exonerate Booth. Shea voices his intent to persist. There is then an attempt on Shay's life, which he narrowly averts by flattening 2 gunmen with his car and evading a third. When he gets a frantic call from Crawford, he nips over to his place to find an unconscious Booth at the scientist's apartment. Crawford explains he found Booth going through his papers, knocked him unconscious, and drugged him with a sedative. Shay transports the unconscious Booth to a wooded area near a private runway. He interrogates him, he denies everything, then Shay dispassionately shoots him dead. In a light aircraft flown by Crawford, they take his body out over the English Channel and dump it into the ocean. Shay has found an air ticket to Athens in Booth's jacket pocket. Masquerading as Booth, he elects to take the flight to see where events lead. Sarah is waiting at the airport and tells Shay that she and her husband were supposed to be travelling to Athens on a second honeymoon, but he has failed to turn up. No surprise really, as he's dead in the water, as they say. Sarah thinks he just got cold feet. Again, not that far from the truth. Shay and Sarah travel to Athens together, where they are approached by an American introducing himself as Professor Parker, Alexander Scorby. He's a CIA agent who assumes Shay is Adam Booth. He passes him information, resulting in his travelling to Corfu, where he is captured, tortured, and interrogated by KGB hood Balkov Peter Dineley. Balkov informs that Booth wasn't working for the Soviets, but was in fact a British double agent feeding the Russians faulty intelligence. Looks like Shay has killed an innocent man. Oops. Balkov's team have abducted Sarah and are holding her hostage at a deserted coastal property under construction. They want Shay to deliver Crawford and his rocket fuel formula to them, or they will execute Sarah. Crawford had lied to Shay about Booth going through his papers. He just wanted him out of the way so he could be with Sarah. During the trade, it soon becomes clear that Shay has thoughtfully engaged the assistance of Parker, whose CIA team intervene and wipe out Balkov and his men in a violent and bloody gunfight. Sarah is wounded and now knows her husband is dead, executed by Shay, most likely in error. Polly has arrived to escort Shay home. At the airport bar, Colonel Scott turns up. He reveals to Shay that Booth really was a communist agent all along, first working for the Chinese and then the Soviets. He was the traitor who sold out Shay's network. Scott and Vaughan Jones were aware of his treachery and were using him, feeding him faulty intel for years that he would pass on to his Kremlin paymasters. The stakes were getting higher though, the more active missions Booth was compromising, so they're not all that unhappy he's been eliminated. As a matter of fact, Shay is in line for a promotion. Why?
You'll be a fully fledged member of the club.
And on that grim note, it ends. I think The Executioner is a cracking little film that deliberately mirrors and draws from the sort of spy universes imagined by Le Carre, Dayton, and Graham Greene. It steers well clear of the glamorous fantasy trappings of Bond, aiming for a far more cynical, clinical, and grounded vibe. It's the most stylish screen work director Wanamaker served up. Much of it is filmed in bright sunlit locations against glittering tourist backdrops, where danger still lurks around every corner just as much as it does in the shadowy nighttime scenes. Cinematographer Coop opts for a languid, dreamlike look, emphasizing the jittery derealization and unpredictability of the world of international espionage. This is underpinned by Goodwin's doomy and nerve-jangling score, which emphasizes the off-key atmosphere and sense of uneasy trepidation. It breeds a distinct impression that events could twist and turn on a sixpence at any moment, maintaining the slow-burning tension throughout. Everything may look safe, clean and attractive enough, but just beneath the surface lies the ever-present threat of dangerous, dirty and devious machinations. Anyone expecting the casting of George Peppard to be a minus factor can think again. The convolution to justify his being an American working for MI5 might be considered hard graft just to get a US star headlining, but it works well in establishing his character as an outsider. He isn't to the manner born and bred, no Oxbridge, Cambridge or equally privileged formative years, no moneyed or titled heritage. He is looked down upon by the traditionalist class stratified snobberazzi populating the intelligence community in jolly old England. It's a sweet move, drawing him as an instant underdog and maybe even more expendable because of it. The thought that the established order would rather indulge a potential traitor than concede to the reasonable concerns of the common man of lesser social collateral is a chilling one. It doesn't turn out to be the case, but the idea it might have is proposed as a working hypothesis. And Peppard is good, closed off, uptight, obsessive, driven, and by and large inflexible. Critics alleging that his performance was wooden and inexpressive didn't seem to grasp that wooden and inexpressive traits might make for a good spy. They're not usually encouraged to be emotionally transparent and easy to read. I like both him and the way he handled the role. His cold-blooded execution of Booth is shocking, yet somehow unsurprising. The earlier dramatic groundwork establishes that he could go either way. He's that type of guy. Judy Geeson is delicious, winsomely sexy, and attractively naive as Polly, hopelessly in love with but endlessly frustrated by Shay. Her vulnerabilities emphasized by her constant concern that he still carries a torch for Sarah. Talking of who, this is one of those films where Joni Collins has a stab at acting over and above just posturing, posing and flouncing around the place as decoratively as possible. She nearly pulls it off too, managing a passable, glammed up version of George Smiley's promiscuous and adulterous wife in the Le Carré novels. Stalwarts Charles Gray, Nigel Patrick and George Baker do all expected of them in the ways you'd expect. Gray and Patrick are a particularly conspiratorial double act, dropping cryptic clues like expensive luxury croutons. "2 grand round here for breadcrumbs, old boy," as they go about their business. Okay, so it's not exactly action-packed, but what action there is jagged, loud, abrupt and violent, with a real edge to it and a certain elegant brutality. When Shay is punched, kicked and beaten by Balkov and his goons, he quips, "I thought you guys used pentothal." Balkov's deadpan reply, "We ran out." Yep, some of the dialogue has a lively, noirish snap and crackle to it. I've heard it called dull and boring and plodding, but I don't think it's any of those things. I like it, or certainly think that I do, which amounts to much the same thing, doesn't it? So why then? Well, every time I've ever watched it, I'm drawn into its world and held there until the end. Could be because I'm secretly in love with Judy Geeson and will fixate on her in every scene she's in every movie she's ever made. Perhaps I find worth, empathy and satisfaction in Shay's anti-establishment rebelliousness and obsessive drive to prove himself right against the odds. That the music, cinematography, script and direction combine to create just the right nervy atmospherics. Or the way the twisty narrative keeps you guessing until the very end whether Booth was a traitor or innocent man killed by the misplaced conjecture of an obsessive colleague. Or all of those things, whichever way it cuts, it's one of my favourite 70s films, and sometimes pinning the rationale down to specifics is just not possible. It is what it is. Thank you as always for your time and attention. Do whatever you want to do, hit like, don't like, comment, subscribe, be a patron of my Patreon thing, make a financial contribution via the thanks button. I have it in mind to do something a little different next, but I have a lot of things in mind, so who knows.